Without further ado, Pastor Barker, give it up.
Well, good afternoon. It is a tremendous privilege to be with you all today. Being in this room at Harborside is always one of my absolute favorite privileges of the year. I always leave Harborside and getting to work with Harborside students just feeling full of hope. Because students here are Kenosha changers, students here are world changers. And I just always get that sense. You are people that care about our city, you care about our world. And that feels really special, and that gives me a lot of hope that our world and future is going to be better because of your contributions. And 8 years ago when I first walked into this room, that's kind of just a sense I had. Kind of just sensed that being here, that the students here were different. And over the last 8 years, I've gotten to see how that plays out in real life. The first group of students I spoke to have since graduated from high school and are now in college or doing other things. And I've seen that group of students, that first group of students I talked to, do amazing things. I think of Celeste. Celeste, upon working with us at Grace Welcome Center for the year through her studies here, when she graduated 8th grade, that summer she was like, you know what? I think Grace Welcome Center needs a food drive. And so she organized this food drive for us. And that was the very first food drive we ever had at Grace Welcome Center. Last year, we ended up passing out something like close to 500,000 pounds of food. And like part of the origin story of that is a Harborside student catching a vision and being inspired to do something about it and helped us launch that and get that off the ground. If you go to our website, you will notice a piece of art that is a huge symbol of what happens in Kenosha, what we strive to see happen in Kenosha. It's a rainbow piece that has 6 panels, and it has a black silhouetted vine that runs through it. And the artist explained, I made this because in Kenosha we come from different backgrounds, we come from different religions, races, neighborhoods, gender and sexual identities, and yet we are absolutely like this vine, totally dependent upon one another. And that is literally at the top of our webpage. And it has been for many, many years. Some of you in this room probably helped paint the front of our church. Yeah, raise your hand if you helped paint the front of our church. Which is a huge gift not only to us, but we have had literally thousands of people have stopped by and they said, the beautiful mural on the front of your church gives us hope. Everybody that just raised their hands, you're all part of that. Harborside students did a fundraiser for us 8 years ago that led to Grace Welcome Center having a second day of breakfast, which over the last, since that fundraiser happened, is probably led to about 35,000 meals being served. Harborside students have raised over $7,000, and I actually used the work of Harborside students because the Harborside students actually wrote the history for us of our center. I used the history page that you all, or those who went before you, created to get ready for today. So Harborside students have done a tremendous amount of things. And in fact, there's a Harborside student who I spoke to 8 years ago who now works with us, one of our key assistants at Grace, and we really couldn't operate without her. So it's a real privilege to be here. It's a privilege to be here with Mr. Underwood. I felt very honored. He said I'm part of his crew, and I feel like he's part of my crew too. And it's a real privilege to get to be here and be part of this great learning environment, this great school where you are formed as people who care about our world. So let me real quick circle back to how Grace Welcome Center got started. So I know you guys know some stuff about First Step, you know some stuff about Grace Welcome Center, you know some stuff about Cush. But what happened is Mr. Bob Waldron, who walked in, our co-founder, one Wednesday night, he just showed up at church and he said, Pastor, there is a serious problem in our community. I want to tell you about it. Would you let me take you to breakfast? And so 2 days later, we went to breakfast, and he told me about this situation. And I feel like that could almost be like the motto. That could be like written somewhere around Harborside. Like, we listen to community problems. We're interested in community problems. We care about problems in our local community. And he said, first step, which is less than a mile from our church, he said, first step, the neighbors, as you pointed out, are complaining about it and want to close it. Would you be willing to open up your church one day a week to the folks at First Step? So maybe that would kind of make the neighbors feel like, hey, other people in Kenosha are taking care of this too. There's a big effort that's working to take care of this group. And as Mr. Underwood mentioned, the group who was staying at First Step, they needed First Step services to sleep. It was housing 30 to 60 people a night, and this was in January. And not only that, but they really couldn't get anywhere. There's other places that you need driver's license to get in, or identification. A lot of these folks who were staying at First Step didn't even have that, and didn't even have access to a birth certificate or a social security card or other documentation that would help them get that. And so how do you get an identification if you don't have your birth certificate, if you don't have an address? How do you get a ID, right? It goes on and on and on. It's like a giant yarn ball where, how do you get to the bottom of it, right? It's all tangled up and it's all difficult. And so a couple weeks later, we opened up Grace Welcome Center. The first week we opened up, we had 4 guests and 6 volunteers. And basically, we just got to know each other. And we had some meals, we had breakfast, we had lunch, we had a lot of coffee. It was a great day. And we got to hear how much First Step meant to our guests. And they became more than guests. One of our beliefs at Grace Welcome Center is each person in the world is a sibling, is a brother or a sister to us. And we started to feel that these people were our brothers and sisters, our siblings. And we started to feel how important it was that First Step stayed open. And so we started trying our best to advocate. So we ended up going to some Common Council meetings. Common Council is where the leaders of Kenosha, our alder people, gather twice a month to make big decisions about what happens with zoning and services, restaurants, businesses. Actually, many things that happen in our city are impacted by what happens at Common Council. Not too many people even know that. Their meetings are always open to the public. And so one thing I hope you would be inspired to do as you now, but and especially as you keep getting older, is to visit a Common Council meeting and pay attention to what's happening in our community. Really big, important decisions get made at these meetings every month. Well, anyways, I got to advocate at some of these meetings. I'll never forget the first meeting I went to. I spoke pretty intensely for our siblings that were visiting us at Grace Welcome Center and why it was important for First Step to stay open. And at the break, one of the aldermen who was hoping to close First Step, kind of in a real aggressive way, started walking up to me. And he literally put his nose against my nose, and he started screaming at me. And this has never happened to me in my adult life, or even before I was an adult, really. And he just started full out screaming at me, spittle flying into my face, nose to nose. He was so angry that I would dare say that we should keep First Step open. And it's a powerful reminder that sometimes when we advocate for those who are under-resourced, there are people that will be strongly opposed to that. There'll be people that really do not like that when we advocate for those that don't have as much resources. Sadly, what happened, and I think you guys know this part of the story, is First Step ended up closing that April. They lost their license. What ended up happening at Grace Welcome Center is the county said, "Boy, we don't have First Step anymore." That's where we were getting a lot of resources into the community. We're doing a lot of case management. We're doing a lot of social work for this group of under-resourced folks. Some of the most difficult to help people in our community, people that had really intense trauma backgrounds. Some people had really intense addiction issues, mental health issues. And so this was a really important place. First Step was a really important place for people to get resources. And they said, boy, Grace Welcome Center, if you guys could just stay open even on Fridays, we'll send a case manager to meet with your folks at least once a week. So that's what we did. We stayed open and kept Grace Welcome Center going long beyond this battle to keep First Step's license. Well, fast forward to the next season, the next fall, as the weather started to change, and all of a sudden we started to realize there was a really big problem for our siblings. You know, in Wisconsin, you can kind of make it in spring, in summer, and early fall outside. It's not great. There's a lot of inconveniences. We'll talk about that in just a second. But that fall, as the fall kept going, it wasn't. This has been a pretty mild fall, right? This is first, not too, a little bit of snow in October, but not too much snow yet. But it was a rougher winter. Winter came a little earlier that year, and we had a bunch of our guests a bunch of our siblings who were staying outside, and who had no place to go. And there's other shelters in town. Shalom Center is a great shelter. They do great work. But as was mentioned, you have to have driver's license and IDs. You have to be able to sleep in a barracks-style sleeping arrangement, which means, basically Shalom, imagine a bunch of bunk beds next to each other. And so, for instance, if you have night terrors because you have mental health issues, or you have some trauma, or you're a veteran and you start reliving violent things you experienced, and you have distress in the middle of the night, unfortunately they won't let you stay there. It makes sense, right? If you're in a room with 30 people, you can't have people having those types of situations. But it meant that there was a whole bunch of people that didn't have a place to go. And unfortunately, Daryl Petticourt, somebody who stayed at First Step and who came to Grace Welcome Center, one night he was unfortunately unhoused, and he was sleeping in a car and ended up hypothermic and ended up tragically freezing to death. And it's a powerful reminder that our city makes really significant decisions that can even cost somebody their life, especially if they're under-resourced and vulnerable. They're really dependent on, for instance, shelters and having enough shelter beds. And it's a really weighty issue, and it's an issue that, as we live in a country where we have some freedom we get to pick our alder people. Every couple of years we get to elect new alder people. And so there's a real responsibility to think about how are our decisions as a community impacting the people who are most under-resourced. Well, it just so happened that fall, as things were getting colder, we had 3 grandmas who had not only become dear siblings to us, but who had actually joined our church, who were staying outside. And they were staying in our courtyard. We let them stay in our courtyard of our church. I love that we have the slide. So they were staying on this platform right here. As you can see, this is a slab it's actually about 4 inches off the ground. And so this is one of the best places in Kenosha to sleep if you have to sleep outside, because that 4 inches keeps you from getting rain, sleet, if snow starts to melt, it keeps you from getting wet. And getting wet is the worst thing that can happen if you're sleeping outside in fall or winter, because you get very cold, right? Anybody have get wet on a cold day? It goes right through your bones, right, when you get wet. And imagine if you don't have a washer dryer. Imagine if you don't have money to pay for a dryer. What happens when your winter coat gets soaked? What happens when your socks and underwear get soaked and you only have one pair? What happens when your sleeping bag gets soaked and it turns into a giant wet ball, and you don't have a clothesline, you don't have a dryer? Are you going to put it in your backpack, and then everything in your backpack's wet, and you're carrying around a cold, wet backpack? It gets complicated, right? So between this slab and then this overhang, there's a lot of protection from the elements. So these 3 grandmas were staying here. It was kind of shocking to me, right? They were just a little younger than my own grandma, and it was really heart-wrenching to see them have to stay outside, and that our community would let that happen. And one of the things that's been maybe most surprising to me through the whole journey of Grace Welcome Center is the range of people that find themselves without housing. We've had infants to people in their 80s come to us that are unhoused and everything in between. And I think it's always especially painful when a really young child comes, an infant, and their parents don't have a place. When a senior that's in their 70s, 80s comes, with all the challenges of being in your 70s and 80s and doesn't have a place. And it's really sobering, right? It's really humbling how many people get caught up in this, how it affects people of all different ages, certainly racial backgrounds, demographics. It really can impact just about anybody. And these three grandmothers were staying, and it started creating a bit of a stir. Our neighbors weren't super happy about it. They were with us for about 6 weeks that fall. There's some people at our church that weren't happy about it. Some people tried to get me fired over this. And so one night I ended up staying out with them to make sure everything was okay. You know what? People are wondering, what happens? Are they gonna burn the church down? Are they gonna take our whole neighborhood down? There's a lot of fear around people that live outside, and I think that's something too that we can really learn from it. Sometimes our guests will talk about how they have nowhere to go, right? They're on the sidewalk. Sometimes they're in front of businesses. And when people walk by, they'll either go out of their way to walk on the other side of the street, or maybe they'll start, rather than make eye contact, they'll start looking down at their feet, or they'll kind of look away. This feeling of almost being invisible, or people trying to make them feel invisible. And it was really something sleeping out there with them one night. What really struck me is there were a lot of challenges I had never thought about. So this all kind of became crystal clear for me. One of these grandmothers was at one point hiding behind one of our bushes in our landscaping. Was hiding behind, it was this tree. And I wondered what was going on at first. Why is she so scared? And why is she trying to hide behind this tree? And as the night wore on, it started to make more sense. Our church is on 60th Street. Grace Welcome Center is on 60th Street. Every about 20 minutes, there were sirens going down 60th. And it startled me, right? It woke me up. Whoa, okay, something's going on. Something's happening. I'm feeling anxious. Is it something near me? What's going on? And then not only that, but at about sometime between 2 and 3 a.m., all of a sudden, somebody at the bus stop starts swearing at us, and then throws a glass bottle. It shatters, and it's whoa, what's gonna happen next? Are they gonna throw another bottle at us? Are they gonna stab us with this broken bottle now? They're real angry. And this grandmother, she, not only was she experiencing this night after night after night, I got to go home the next night and sleep in a bed, but she's somebody that had pretty significant mental health challenges. She had some paranoia. She had some anxiety issues that she was being medicated for. And she's in this situation that's really amping all of this up. And not only is she in this situation that's amping up all, her pre-existing challenges, but she's trying to do it while living with a backpack. And when you're living out, a lot of our folks, that our siblings that live outside, they have to carry everything they own at all times, basically. And there's some obstacles they face, just basic life. So, and this gets really gritty and intimate in one ways. But, for instance, if you live outside, where do you go to the bathroom? It's, you don't have a bathroom in your place of dwelling to just pop into. So your best bet really is you have to buy something cheap at either a convenience store or a McDonald's or Wendy's. Buy the cheap coffee, nurse it so you can maybe stay there for 4 or 5 hours, and that way you have access to both drinking water and also a bathroom. Now, there's a problem. You're carrying pretty much all your possessions. Maybe they're wet, maybe they smell. You don't have access to a washer dryer. And so oftentimes you have to leave your pack outside of the establishment you're hoping to stay in for a while. So now your pack with all your possessions is outside of your, you no longer have direct access to. What happens if somebody walks by and steals it? What happens if somebody, an employee says, oh, there's this really dirty, smelly backpack in the bushes next to the entrance of our restaurant. I'm gonna throw it away. And so this happens to our siblings all the time. And this happened to this dear grandmother of ours. And so she's trying to take medication. It's really hard for her to get prescription medication that she needs. It's hard for her to see her psychiatrist. She's sleeping outside, which is making her more anxious. And she has to haul all her meds around in her backpack, which at points gets stolen, wet, damaged, or thrown away. There are a lot of obstacles she's facing, right? And it was really hard to find a way. I think it's really helpful for all of us to remember that when we think about those who are under-resourced, that oftentimes there's a whole series of things that are making it challenging for them to find a more secure footing. As the fall went on, we got really serious about advocating for people so they could get shelter. So we had many friends, many siblings who were outside that fall. The city, the county, Human Services was saying, there's not a problem. Everybody can get in at Shalom. And yet every time I called Shalom, they said, we've got a waiting list that's like 20 or 30 names long. It could take months for somebody else to get in here. And this is also kind of another challenge when it comes to thinking about the challenge of being under-resourced. A lot of times people erase you. They don't honor that you have identity, that you have personhood. They can just say things like, hey, there were probably 30 or 40 people that year, I can't remember the exact numbers, maybe even 60, who were sleeping outside that fall and that winter. And, over and over again, they're telling us, and I'm seeing where they're staying. Some of them are sleeping on our property. And Shalom's full, and the city's saying we don't have a problem, the county's saying we don't have a problem. How does that all fit up? So we started really trying to put some pressure on the city and the county to take action. And so we did, there were really like three big things we did. The first thing is we just started taking copious amounts, or a lot of notes. Mr. Bob Waldron, who you met, every time somebody came in, he would make a note and he would write their name down and write their phone number down or some other way to communicate with them. And so we had this long list of people that were staying outside. And that sort of started to be a proof point of how we could share, who there's real people. Like, there's this person that's got a name, and they're staying here, and they're sleeping out in the parking lot, or they're sleeping under our awning. How can you tell us there's not a problem? This person has a problem. So that was the first thing we did. The second thing we did is we started taking some public actions. This was in partnership with CUSH, Congregations United to Serve Humanity. And so, for instance, we took over the trolley system one day. So we bought trolley tokens for all of our siblings who were sleeping outside. And we said, you know what? This day, why don't you stay warm on the trolley? And we even had coffee and we had treats. And so we could basically give them everything they needed on the trolley, and they could be on the trolley all day. And we turned that into basically like a mobile shelter for the day. And that got people's attention, right? Because some people wanted to ride the trolley for the purpose of getting places, and all of a sudden that has become this mobile shelter. And it kind of also proved this point. There's a lot of people who need shelter because this car was full of people. A couple weeks later, we were at City Hall at the Common Council meeting, and we sang Christmas carols that were related to warmth and coming home for the holidays. And it was really pointed, right? And I'll challenge you a little bit. Listen to some Christmas music this year and pay attention. What would it mean to hear this, thinking about some of our unsheltered siblings who don't have a place to go, who don't have a warm place to go, who don't have a meal, and who maybe are estranged from their family? The Christmas carols really sound really different if you think about it that way. And we sang these very publicly, interrupting and disrupting this meeting. The mayor comes storming out. We kind of think, oh man, is he like going to call Kenosha Police Department on us and have us arrested for interrupting his meeting? And he actually says, we're going to open up 10 extra shelter beds at Shalom so we can start getting people who are unsheltered into shelter. So it was a really powerful transition to go from Daryl Petticourt. I actually ended up doing his memorial service at our church, which was really this beautiful experience, tragic but beautiful, around how many people who live outside came to celebrate his life, and a really intense moment of dignity, that even though this person didn't have shelter, they could have a beautiful memorial service. But we were able to see some big transformation, big transition. That winter ended. A couple of weeks after that, got invited to Harborside for the first time, and we got to start working together. It was a great partnership. We had this big fundraiser, Railroad to Shelter, and that led to us being able to go from being open on Friday to being able to be open on Thursday. And it was a tremendous blessing for Grace Welcome Center. Again, opened by Harborside students. A whole day of operation. It's really, it's so special as being in this room. It's so humbling how much students have shaped and grown our program. The following winter, we found out that we were going to have more problems, because the following winter, yet again, we learned that the city wasn't going to open up the 10 new beds, and so we were kind of back to ground zero. And so we went back to the organizing. How are we gonna work this out? We're gonna start keeping track. And what we did this year is, every time somebody came in unsheltered, we would, if they gave us permission, we would give their contact information, their name, and we would send it to the mayor, the county exec, all the alder people, and the human services division. And it was like a drip, drip, drip thing. Like, okay, 3 people 1 week, 7 people 1 week, 10 people the next week, and we had this long list, and we just kept sending, and they kept saying there's nobody outside. Well, again, we had this long chain of emails saying, yeah, there are. We've got the names to prove it. We know where people are staying. And fortunately, that year, the county opened up a hotel voucher program and started creating an opportunity for people who were staying outside, and especially in the worst weather, to get a hotel voucher and stay there. The hotel voucher program ended up creating some new opportunities for our community. But before I get into that, actually, I should say something else was going on in Uptown. As First Step was being closed, we also lost our grocery stores. So there were 3 grocery stores within a mile and a half of our church. Actually, they're closer to a mile. There was the Pick and Save on 63rd, the old Save-A-Lot on 52nd, and the Fresh Market on 52nd. And in a 1 year period, those all left. They all shut down. They closed. So all of a sudden, we became a food desert. It became very hard to get fresh food in our neighborhood. And so that was going on. We had the hotel voucher program, which was leading to some stability. Those 3 grandmas got into Shalom Center on those 10 extra beds, and that led to them each getting into supported housing. And so they went from being homeless to not being homeless anymore. Them, along with some other people, as they were getting into apartments through extra services, would invite me over. They'd say, Pastor, would you come and would you do a blessing for my new apartment? Would you offer a prayer of thanksgiving for us? We're just so grateful to have this. And so I'd get invited into these apartments. And it was, again, so special for these people who I'd seen where they were staying and seeing all the challenges, and all of a sudden they have an apartment. And boy, managing your pills and your appointments and your mental health gets a lot easier when you're inside. And for instance, that woman, she's reconnected with her family. She's doing really well. She's still coming to our church all the time. And her whole life is totally different than when she was living outside. And that's all because there was stability of being inside, having the stability to be able to take the medication she needed, see the psychiatrist she needed, and she was able to get her whole life together. And that's true for many people that come through our program. Once they can get into shelter, once they can get into a stable apartment, that really changes the trajectory of their life. Well, I was getting to go into these apartments, and people would open up a refrigerator and a cabinet, a cupboard, and there would be literally no food. I'm not saying like there's ketchup and mustard and relish. I'm saying like nothing. Like there is not a single thing that had a single calorie in their whole apartment. And so they're sharing that with me. These grocery stores are closing, and we were trying to wonder, what are we going to do next at Grace Welcome Center? And so we were asking our siblings, what do you want to see happen next in our community? And I feel like this listening thing is really important. This is like another great Harborside value. Listening to people in the community to get a sense of what's needed. And they started sharing with us, what we really need? We need a food pantry. We need a food pantry in our neighborhood. The closest food pantries were more than 2 miles away. The grocery stores were more than 2 miles away. They shared with us the bus system is not great. And since then, I've learned a lot more about the bus system. But because of all the transfers, it's really difficult to get around without taking many hours. And then you're thinking about groceries, like, okay, you can buy a couple bags of groceries, you get on the bus, it takes like 2 hours to get where you need to go because you're taking transfers, you just lost your whole day, there's other appointments and things you need to do, you need to go to the pharmacist, you need to go to the psychiatrist, you need to see your social worker, there's all these things that need to happen, you don't have time to be spending half a day on the bus to get to the grocery store. So we decided to meet this need that our siblings were telling us about. And so we opened a small pantry thinking that we were going to serve, maybe we could serve like 50 families a week. Well, the first week we opened at absolute capacity. We had 50 families come through. For the next 8 months, every week we served at least 50 families. Sometimes we would serve like 55 families even. We would give out all of the food we had. That was 2019, the food pantry opened. Well, lo and behold, March 2020 rolls around. That big, terrible March 2020, and I see people maybe closing theirs because nobody wants to hear about March 2020. The worst time for all of us, as the pandemic shut down normal life, and everything that we counted on and thought was just something we could, bank on, all shut down, in a matter of like 2 weeks. The first week of the pandemic, we went from having 50 families come through our pantry to we were up to like 80 the first week, and then we were up to 90 the second week, 110 the third week, 120 shortly after that, and then by that summer we were serving like 180 families a week, food pantry services. And as we were doing that, at that time our pantry was mainly non-perishable goods, so things like things that came in cans, things that came in boxes. And we had a gentleman come by, and this was one of the most powerful things I ever have seen. He said, I noticed your pantry doesn't really have any produce, any like healthy stuff. And he said, I want to donate something to you. I want to donate a walk-in cooler so you can start giving out fresh food. Do you have any sense of how much that would cost? And lo and behold, I actually did. It was going to cost $20,000, and so he cut a $20,000 check right there for our walk-in cooler. I see a hand up. I'll take a question if you have one.
It wasn't a question. I was going to guess how much it cost.
Oh, going to guess how much it cost. Okay. Somebody saw this walk-in cooler donation. About a week later, they said, you know what, you're missing something. You're missing a walk-in freezer. And so them and actually another person donated then a walk-in freezer to us right next to the walk-in cooler so we could have frozen produce as well. Powerful reminder that what happens at Grace Welcome Center involves the whole community coming together, Just tremendous generosity. It involves Harborside students. It involves donors. It involves people that I don't really know I basically only met this person 1 or 2 times before he dropped off like a bag of groceries a couple times, and then he's dropping a $20,000 check.
Was there any major technical difficulties with the freezer and the cooler?
Yo, that's a great question. Yes. I would say not major, might be too significant, but getting them both installed in a basement that wasn't really set up to be, with both, you have to run water lines and electrical, and you have to have a compressor unit that goes outside. That led to many complexities. If we can scoot back to the courtyard slide, we can take a look at. Here are the compressor units for those 2 units. So getting it all set up did take quite a bit of installation challenge. So yeah, that was a big task. Yes.
Yeah. What would you say is the most amount of people you get? Well, what time of year do you say you get the most amount of people for the food pantry? Yeah, like what? Yeah, what season?
Another great question. So there are many things that dictate when people come. So during the pandemic, we were just up. And then we thought, oh, vaccines come. And we actually got to be the first we got to be a satellite vaccine site, which was amazing for our guests. And we thought, okay, like we're through COVID-ish. And then as you all know, then there's like other variants that we didn't necessarily know were going to happen, and all the things that kept happening around COVID. So it just kept climbing, and then all of a sudden we hit inflation last summer, and when the inflation thing hit, we started climbing up to like 200 families a week, and then actually the federal government cut the COVID food stamp relief back in February this year, and so actually we've been just climbing up. So now we've had as many as 280 families come through in a week. So it just continues to expand, unfortunately. So part of it is around these like big cultural or big social issues, like around crisis, basically. So when big things like inflation and COVID, employment, part of what happened early in the pandemic is, everybody lost their jobs. That I'll never forget the first week we were open during the pandemic. One of our volunteers came through the line, and they had this they looked like they'd been punched in the gut. And he whispers to me, he says, "Pastor," I say, "Hey, how's it going?" And, thinking like he's coming to volunteer. And he says, "I can't volunteer. I lost my job. We don't have any food. Would it be okay if I get food at your pantry now? And I can't volunteer because I'm trying to find a new job." And so it's like really, it literally, when I say we jumped from like 50 families to 80, that first week, like probably 25 of those families had just lost their job. They were like working in hotels, working in restaurants that had shut down, and they were now laid off. And it's like, what do we do? So it's just like it was just heart-wrenching. But then there are some other things that tie into what happened. So we do have 2 ways you can use our pantry. You can walk up to our pantry, kind of like an old school hamburger stand. And that tends to be a little bit seasonal, although again, we do see it just an overall growth trend. But in the winter, that tends to dip down a little bit. So that's really weather related. So for instance, we stay open all year. So like we've been open in blizzards, we've been open in rainstorms. There's only one time we ever had to close because of weather. We actually had so much snow in the parking lot that the food trucks couldn't clear. And cars couldn't get in. So you know how it is. Like if you get like 14 inches, you literally can't go through it. So that type of thing closes us. But when we have snow, that impacts how many people walk. The drive-through part of our parking food pantry is the other part. It tends to be pretty consistent, but again, you'll see a little bit less of a dip on a bad weather day. And then, some of the things that impact people's lives also impact when people come to the pantry. So during the holidays, people come more. They have guests coming to Thanksgiving or Christmas or other holiday celebrations, and so they need more food. Okay. And so thank you. Yeah, lots that goes into that. All right, so and then we'll ask some more questions. So just to wrap up, so grateful for your willingness to go on this journey with us this year. To go from 6 guests to 280 families coming through. Last year that meant roughly 16,000 non-duplicative guests, 32,000 pantry visits. The only way that thing is possible is because of students and so many people in our community just coming around us. So grateful for each one of you being one of those community members that comes around us. It just means the world to us. And it's really weird being here at Harborside this year. There's 3 students in the 7th grade class that have put in significant volunteer hours already. Some of them for many years here, which is really special. And so it's amazing just how many different people volunteer and care and are passionate. Which then takes me to my last thing, which I'll close with. We are hoping for some help this holiday. So we get slammed during the holidays, and there's a rather unusual item, but we've been talking about this around under-resourced folks having some unique situations. And one of the things that oftentimes gets overlooked is one of the most highly sought-after items in our pantry is actually toilet paper. We give every family 1 roll of toilet paper per week they come to the pantry. That means we are giving out up to 280 rolls of toilet paper. Stacking that end to end, I'm curious how high that would be. I think you guys are going to try to maybe get toilet paper up to the roof of here. I'll be curious how many rolls that is. But we would be really grateful if you could do a toilet paper drive for us. We're struggling a bit to keep up with demand. Again, this year, if you looked at the number of visits, it's just a straight line up. And so we could really use your support with that. So we'd be grateful for that. I saw your hand, so I want to just give you can ask the final question.
How many people have you seen homeless?
How many people have I seen? Over the years, more than I can count. And this year, just to give you a little sense of update, Shalom Center is still at capacity, still on a waiting list. This past Friday, we had 14 families call Grace Welcome Center looking for shelter that had been turned away from Shalom Center, which is, we're continue to be in a crisis in Kenosha around having enough shelter beds.
Okay, this is the worst part. We run out of time, but if anyone want to hang out and talk to Pastor real quick, I can get just for a few minutes, just kind of chat with them, or you can go to your next class. I don't have a class coming in here. But give them a round of applause. Thank you. We'll be meeting with him a lot, so thank you for introducing us to this awesome work.
Appreciate each one of you, and thanks for all you guys do. And